today's webinar, How AI and Automation Create More Time for Strategy. My name is Dr. Pat Lawton. I serve as the W.R. Sweat Chair in Technology Leadership Education and the Director of Graduate Studies here at the Technological Leadership Institute, which I will refer to as TLI from here on out at the University of Minnesota. I'm delighted to be your moderator for this session. Because this is such an important, exciting, and timely topic. It's one that really speaks to the challenges and opportunities leaders face in integrating automation and AI in ways that free us to focus more on really important things like strategy, innovation, and people. So indulge me here for a moment while I just tell you a little bit about TLI. So I'm just going to throw up all of my points here and just give you a very quick description about TLI. So for those of you who may be less familiar with us, we are part of the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Minnesota. We were founded in 1987 through an endowment from the Honeywell Foundation, and we focus on developing leadership in technology-based environments. We help technical professionals grow into strategic leaders who can navigate complex and fast-changing industries. At TLI, we offer 3 Masters of Science programs, so MS degrees, security technologies, medical device innovation, and management of technology. And we also support technology management and cybersecurity minors for students at the university. Beyond our degree programs, we offer a few post-baccalaureate certificates, one in electrification engineering and one in technology leadership. And we're excited to launch, we're just getting approval hopefully as we speak at the Board of Regents meeting right now, a new certificate in cybersecurity leadership coming in 2026. So the other thing that we do here at TLI is we also collaborate really closely with industry. We offer customized training and workshops that strengthen technical leadership in those tech-based organizations. So we have a lot going on at TLI, and at the end of the session, we'll share a QR code with you so that you can stay in touch with us and hear more about what we're up to over here. So like any good webinar steward, I have a few housekeeping notes. So before we begin, I just want to cover those. So today's session is scheduled to run for an hour, so we will wrap up by 1 o'clock. And because it's a webinar, we want to minimize the background noise, and we have quite a few participants today. All attendees will remain muted throughout the webinar. Now, that being said, we still want it to be as interactive as possible in this format. So please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll gather those questions as they come in and bring them into the discussion as we go along. So we won't wait until the end for those. Rather, we'll try and interject those as we go. Now, the webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email and a link to the recording after the session. And we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions along the way. Let's just have this be a conversation and not solely a presentation. So that is out of the way. The housekeeping notes are all done. So now let's talk about who's here with us today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our 2 speakers. First, we have Dr. David Nguyen, the Gemini Chair in Engineering Entrepreneurship and Senior Fellow here at the Technological Leadership Institute. And joining him is Mark Wehde, Chair of Mayo Clinic Engineering. He's an assistant professor of biomedical engineering at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science and a fellow in the Mayo Clinic Academy of Educational Excellence. At TLI, for us, Mark serves as the James J. Rainier Chair in Medical Device Innovation. So we're really excited to have both of these experts in the room to debate and chat with us. And they're going to explore how AI and automation are really reshaping the way leaders approach innovation and strategy. So thanks both to Mark and David for being here with us today. And I want to turn it over to each of you to share a little bit more about your background. And I also want you to answer an opening question from me, which is, tell us why you are interested in today's webinar topic. So we'll kick it over to Mark first.
And thanks everyone who is joining us today to talk about this topic. I think Pat covered my background, but I have been working at the Mayo Clinic Engineering Group for about 41 years now and have immersed myself in the applications of technology for providing better healthcare, and also for trying to identify ways that it can help my life be better as well. And I think that's a little bit of the topic we're going to be talking about today. I will say in full disclosure that I am no expert here, so I am inviting all of you in to maybe take a little part in the journey that I'm going through, and I think a lot of us are going through right now. My first exposure to generative AI was, hearing about it 3 years ago when it was released. And I remember about 2 months later, I was talking to one of my colleagues at the University of Wisconsin who said, I'm using this tool 20 times a day. Why aren't you using it? I'm like, kind of a light bulb went off that, I'm missing something here. And my journey over the last couple years has been what many of us are doing, learning how to use it individually to help me do things better, starting with simple things like cleaning up an email or organizing a list. Some of those maybe trivial tasks, but kind of an entry into this. And I'm getting better at using it for personal productivity. And that's leading me to also explore ways that we can use it organizationally to help us solve some of the problems we face. And we'll touch on a couple of those things today. The way we're using it to help deal with some of our data with our portfolio management activities, or using it to help augment our work that goes on in various meetings. So looking at how to apply this more broadly, more organizationally. What I'm not going to talk about a lot, because I don't have a lot of background here, is how a larger organization might incorporate this into their strategy around providing products. But I'm really thinking about it through the lens: how does a team become better, more efficient, more productive, leveraging some of these tools?
All right, everyone, my turn. So in addition to what Pat was telling you guys, let's see. So my technical background is computer science. My PhD is computer science, but I am not an academic. I actually come from the startup world, and I'm interested in this space because when you think about context shifts, these are the interesting opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship. So I come from it from a very computer science entrepreneurship lens. And this is a common conversation that I have with Mark here at the office, where we sit in front of a whiteboard and we geek out for a while. And what I'm trying to get at is, what's the context shift here, and why is that interesting? So hopefully we'll frame it all today. And what do you think, Mark? Should we start?
Absolutely. Yeah. Where's the beginning, David?
So I was thinking about how to start this, and I think let's take business intelligence, right? So for those of you on the line, the history of business intelligence was at one point, business leaders were trying to figure out how to plan their businesses, and for a while it was just, it feels good this way, right? And then they would make their decision based on their gut intuitions. And business intelligence came from, we have all this data, let's collect it, and then we can discuss it, right? And it came all the way from early in the 70s of collecting all this data from different silos. And it was super hard because each department had their own format and the things, and it wasn't very digitized. So you had this paper report that comes in at the end. And so every year, business leaders would take their reports and then figure out, all right, what's our strategy, what's our decision-making process, and then hopefully success. Yeah, do you think that's about right from your perspective, Mark?
Well, I'll say so. And I think you're looking at it from the perspective of the strategy and direction of a large organization, and how do they pull data in to help them make decisions better. I'll also offer up that within an organization, there are a lot of uses for data. And, I have a pretty strong background in quality, learning from the lessons that Dr. Deming brought over 30, 40 years ago. And one of the fundamental components of doing any type of continuous improvement or making good decisions is you've got to have data and metrics. So first you can tell, see ground truth essentially in terms of the problem you're trying to solve, but also understand if the things that you're doing are making a measurable difference. And without having that data, not only do you not know if you're doing the right thing, you have no way of being able to assess the impact of it. And that has been a problem throughout my career. So often the thing that's missing is the data, and we have had to go by gut feel. I think this will make it better. I feel like it's better now, or I don't feel like it's better now. And that's not really, I mean, in the absence of data, that's what you have to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
But if there's ways to get data, that makes a huge difference in terms of informing your decision making. And even now in our modern world, and we tend to think of business intelligence and we think we've got all this digitized data, and certainly we all do, but it is in so many disparate systems. And so being able to access and retrieve it is such a manual process in many cases
Mhm.
that it still becomes overwhelming and sometimes just too time consuming to be able to leverage it. So, looking at where things are going, the ability to make access to data, to good data, to have that much more seamless and actually being able to get the data you need um, to use to make decisions. I think that's going to be hugely impactful, not only at the highest levels of the organization in terms of, what markets are getting into and products are going to be selling, but in terms of the work that we're doing within an organization in our own domains to make better decisions about the things we're doing or the processes we're trying to improve or whatnot.
This is what we're talking about, right? So there's data, and for a long time that was hard to get, but if you get it, you can figure out the patterns and you can do some predictions. Um, and the game of business is won by decision making. Whoever makes better decisions wins. And so this is why business intelligence (BI) was started. And the whole idea there is like what Mark was saying. You gather all this data, and at the beginning it was just some human looking at all this data and trying to find patterns and prediction and predicting the results in their own head. And then that informed that decision. And if they did it right, success. Right. And I think what Mark and I are talking about is if you unpack this, so if you go to the next slide, if we unpack this, what's really happening here is there's two parts of that uh, patterns and prediction part, right? Is if you have that data, it will help you predict things. So it will help you with what might happen. It won't help you with what to do. That's a human thing. That's judgment. That's something that the lead or whoever's in charge has to make that decision. But with better prediction, you make better judgment and you make better decisions. And if you do the right decision, success. Right. So this is like the process that we're talking about. Mark, can we go back like before AI? How is this done?
Um, in many cases, very, very manually.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems. Or, you had to put relatively sophisticated systems in place to gather the data
Mhm.
that you needed. And so, the challenge in many cases is that as you're thinking about the decisions you want to make and asking yourself, what data do I need to make that decision? You realize you don't have the data. And the time it takes to get that data can be, put you at a real competitive disadvantage in
Yeah,
many, many cases. And you've got to make this decision between, should I get the data so I can actually see the impact, or should I just go? And so, we start to put systems in place to gather data, but in many cases, they can be fairly cumbersome. It's expensive to gather data, and then it's hard to organize it into a meaningful form so that you can make informed decisions based on it. So, those are some of the problems that we've been trying to solve
yeah.
for years and years and years. The other thing I don't see on your diagram here is any kind of a feedback loop either in terms of being able to measure the success of
Yeah.
what you're doing.
So I think so. In the early days of BI, um, this process was so costly that a feedback loop might happen like once a year,
Hmm.
and so it gets lost, right? Like you go through this process once, and um, that's all that's all you can afford to do. And what I think is interesting is maybe just put this up. Like this looks very much like the AI ML loop. So if you can get to the third graphic here, right? In in machine learning, there's this idea of a AI loop or a flywheel where here I'll give you an example. So uh, a lot of us use iPhones, and the iPhone is you unlock it by looking at your face, right? And so it collects a bunch of data of your face, and it does a prediction of is this Mark or not, right? And when it's Mark, it unlocks the phone, and now you know like this current image of that was just registered is Mark. What's interesting is Mark, like most humans, age and dresses differently. His hair is different, so you don't have the exact same model every time. So every time there's a new data point, it gets fed back into the data. The model gets shifted again, and every time Mark uses it, his phone gets better and better and better, right? This loop is super fast in the AI ML world, but I think we can apply this loop into the business intelligence world, where we're at a point where collecting data is getting inexpensive and possible, and that prediction modeling process can happen on the fly. You don't have to wait till the end of the quarter or the end of the year to do this. And I think this is where the interesting thing is, and maybe this is where we need to like dig down and think through.
Yeah, well, I think when you think about the whole process of getting better data, I think that's somewhere that AI is really going to be helping us. When I think about how we go about trying to get data, let's say we're trying to figure out how much overhead our QMS is imparting to our development processes, and say we're trying to make something a little bit more efficient and be able to figure out if we did. The process of trying to, we can identify specifically what data we need to capture. It's a challenging thing to capture that. But when you incorporate AI into the data gathering process, you have the ability for it to be determining what that data is based on context, right? So, think about the old days when, well, the modern days too. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that do things like tracking keystrokes, or with software developers tracking lines of code and things like that. All right. I'm not a big fan of those kind of applications, except when they are being applied in the search for getting better data to make better decisions. And so you think about it, I would love to have a system that keeps track of what I'm doing during the day and categorizing that into various different types of works to give me better insights into that. And you can envision that just capturing the data won't do that, because somehow I not only have to capture it, I have to write down what I'm doing at that time. Now, think about it. You can quite easily envision that adding an AI component to that, it can tell if I'm doing emails. It could even tell based on subject lines what kind of work I'm doing, or it can tell if I'm writing an SBAR or working on other kinds of activities. And that takes a lot of the burden out of being able to capture data. And I think that's a huge advantage. The other thing I think that's maybe missing from this diagram, that's a piece of it, is I tie in some of the automation that we're able to do along with the AI as well, and kind of partner those together. And sometimes we think about them separately, but there's a lot of overlap there as well, because AIs are enabling a lot of the automation we might want to do.
Yeah, I treat automation as like easy decisions, right? That there are different types of decisions. There are decisions that are very easy and therefore doesn't require a lot of judgment. And so it's like if you get good prediction, just do it. You guys might know about Jeff Bezos has this idea of different types of decisions. There are decisions that are very easy to undo, and so for those decisions, you just do it, and something bad you undo. And there are decisions that you can't undo, And so that requires a lot more judgment, right? Before you make that decision, you have to put in a lot more judgment. And so I think automation fits into there's not a whole lot of judgment here. Like once you finish step one, whatever the output is, cool, make the decision, but to put it to step two, right? But I think that process though is like I think we need to unpack that a little bit more with in business. Again, I'm going to make this quite funny. In business, the company that makes a better decision wins, and so because of that, businesses spend so much time collecting data, right? And so it gets to the point where I'm spending all my time collecting data and I'm doing operational things, and I can't think deeply about anything bigger than I'm just going to collect data, right? So this happens at the big level, like corporate level, or even to the individual level, where Mark was saying, like, it would be cool if I had this tool that told me that could collect data for me. Outside of having a tool, I have to collect that data myself. I write it down or whatever. That takes too much time, right? And if Mark is just spending all his time collecting data, he can't do any actual work. Even worse, he can't think long term. And so this is the same things happening with businesses, where we're just collecting, a bunch of our work is just collecting data. But
Yeah.
I think this is where we're starting to think like, hey, things are changing, because siloed data used to be a thing that as the need for more data comes, more innovation comes in that space where it's getting easier to collect data.
Yeah. I really see a couple foundational sort of things happening here. So one, I think, we can all agree we need good data to help inform good decisions. The nice thing is here we can leverage AI to help us get good data, but the real question is what can we do once we have that data available? And I think kind of one of the underlying premises of AI is that it can help us with the data, but it can't help us if it doesn't have the data. There's a real driving need to be able to do that. In the older days, if the way we were using data was in very specific, defined, and somewhat constrained ways. There was certain data in a system, and it was designed to give you certain types of insights, and that was it. And what I'm seeing, the potential as we integrate AI tools into this is we're able to do more asking questions on the fly and exploring data in different ways other than what the system was designed for. So, I'm used to using tools they have some dashboards that they bring up, and those dashboards present exactly what they were designed to present. And if I want to know something a little bit different, if I want to do a query, that's different from what the dashboard was designed to, I either have to know how to go in and write a query or do the SQL work or something like that. I can't do these natural language kind of questions and interactions. And those are some of the things that AI is now allowing us to do, so that I'm able to, in a sense, have a conversation with the data, and do a better job exploring it.
Yeah, so I think like what you just said, Mark, like we apply it to this graph here, right? A digital system is helping us collect more data, right? If we have more data, then now we can use AI to ask questions about what might happen in different situations. So the prediction is getting better. And because there's more data, you're getting better predictions. And if you're getting better predictions, right, most of your time can now be spent on the judgment part. So to make the decision, we're not spending human time cranking through models and such to get predictions. But if that prediction is getting better, we're spending more time in the judgment part here. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, David, thanks. I think that's really interesting. This topic feels like it could be a multi-session topic here, but just for the sake of moving us along a little bit, I want to think about, okay, so let's say now we've been able to collect good data as outlined by the flywheel here, that we have pretty good data to work on. I'm curious from the two of you about how you've seen organizations using AI-enabled systems for insight and alignment. So I want to go into some examples and action. And I want to also tack on the topic of how are people reacting to AI generated insights within these organizations that are using them? So Mark, I'll kick it over to you, and then David, you can add your thoughts.
Yeah, well, this will probably involve a little bit of a back and forth, but let's kind of one of the fundamental challenge we have. I mean, most of us probably on this call are what we would consider to be knowledge workers. And so we're dealing with a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. And I think in many cases, really struggling to keep all of that in mind. And I know personally, one of the challenges I have is I move from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, and I'm switching contexts on a pretty regular basis. And the pace at which I'm doing that is very different from what it was historically. Historically, I would sit down before a meeting, I'd look through my notes, I'd get ready for the meeting, I'd go to the meeting, I'd finish, I'd take some notes, right? And then probably review that at the end of the day. And neurologically, what that does is help form long-term memories. But with the pace we've got now, we're moving from one thing to another, and that long-term memory formation is simply interfered with. And I think this is probably an ongoing and persistent problem with anybody who's in that kind of a situation where they're getting a lot of different topics on a consistent basis. And so one of the huge advantages and applications I'm seeing with some of the some of the generative AI stuff is the ability to start capturing that information in ways that's inherently consumable for me to help form those long-term memories. And simple example is kind of the meeting scenario that I was just describing. We have series of ongoing meetings where we come back and continue on in a topic, and there are a number of generative AI tools that help manage that. And one of the things that we're doing within our engineering team at Mayo is exploring the different tools and how we can best do that. And conceptually, the way we want to use this is we're going to leverage a platform like Teams to do the recording and summarization of meetings, to do action items. And what we're able to do fairly easily is go back to a prior meeting and say, hey, can you give me a summary? So we can do pre-meeting briefings, we can do post-meeting briefings, we can remember what we've talked about. Another capability we're exploring is the ability for a tool like that to be able to query discussions over many meetings. So we've got a topic. I know we've talked about this 3 times over the last 6 months. Can you give me a summary of what those discussions were? And Copilot has the ability to do that. Now, we have those things in meeting minutes that we've done manually. The Copilot generated meeting minutes are much more robust and much better. When I wanted to go back and try to find something like that, they were all in a drive. Now they're in a SharePoint site, and I can go in and I can say search within content for particular topics and see if maybe I can find where we talked to it again, so that I could go look at the notes and hopefully recreate what we were thinking. But now that's fairly seamless to do, is to query that. There are some more sophisticated things we can do around meeting management as well. But I think that knowledge component and being able to manage knowledge, to be able to incorporate it into how do we learn and internalize some of the discussions that we've been having, especially those extend over time, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think so. I like this example, Mark, because you can think of an org as like at the corporate level where there's all these different departments and such, but you can also think of the org as like my team, right? What's the work that needs to be done in this smaller org? But there are operational things that we all have to do. So because of those responsibilities and those pressure, we don't spend the time reviewing the notes anymore. And we don't have the time to figure out, all right, what did we talk about last time, and how can we have this uh, memory, as it were, of what our team's doing. But if we start to use tools and automation to help us collect our thoughts, help us refine our meetings, and even to predict, like last week you guys did this, so this week these are the important things, right? Here are the predictions that it's making, and it requires the human judgment to go forward. I think it's what's interesting for us to see here is if we automate, if we crank up the prediction machine, like where does what value add can we push into the system? You're shaking your head. What are you thinking, Mark?
Well, yeah, I mean, thinking about how to leverage these tools to make predictions. That's one of the foundational business applications in terms of what do our consumers want and how do we market things best to them. And it is pretty incredible how these tools can help generate some of those kind of insights. Of course, the challenge is the need for the human in the loop too. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the human has to have access to some of that information, because that's where, as you showed in that earlier slide, that's where the judgment is really,
Mm-hmm.
really coming in.
Yeah. And we, so if there's one caveat, one caution to give to those on the line, I don't trust AI. Like, it's a pretty good predictor, but it's not guaranteed to be right. Right. So we always have to be the final arbiter of, is this true? Is this really true?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if it makes errors, like no, like the human judgment has to like come in and say, nope, that's wrong. Right. And but I think the value add for us at this, in this particular context of history, is there are these systems that are getting really good at predicting. And so we don't have to spend our time calculating that by hand, right? What we do instead is use that prediction and then figure out, all right, let's add our own judgment to this and speed this up even faster. Everything from, go ahead, Mark.
I think an interesting thing about what you're saying is you think about how we have to change as we interact in a more AI-centered world. And, you mentioned judgment. I think critical thinking, as important as it is, becomes even more important, because you have to be able to think critically about what you're getting from the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you said, you can't trust it. Now, maybe in 2 or 3 generations, somehow that'll change, but I personally have my doubts. I feel like sometimes it's like a child, a really smart, precocious child without any real, kind of depth of experience or knowledge about the world, and constantly feel like I have to be redirecting it. And it seems very distracted by shiny objects too, because it'll get off on tangents that surprise me sometimes.
Yeah, it's good to hear that from both of you. One of our actually current MOT students had commented earlier about how really being cautious about AI's judgment and remembering at the end of the day that if there's an error, it's human, it's not AI, because we didn't do that judgment interjection from the human element. So I think that's a really nice way to think about that. Thanks, Olga.
Yeah, and I think thinking about how we use it. I'm really focusing more and more on how we can solve broader problems within the organization. But the key is really learning first how to use it as an individual. And there's kind of a natural process that we go through as we do that. The first thing is we ask it to do something. We're like, oh, wow, look at that. That was easy and that was really great. And then you start thinking critically though about what it's getting, and you're like, oh, but that's not quite right. That's not quite what I meant to say. There's more context to it. And so there's this first phase where a lot of people are using it as a tool and not really thinking about it critically, and you can kind of tell. And then you kind of advance your maturity and you realize, no, this is just helping me think, helping me organize, helping me word things. But at the end of the day, I've got to go through that and make sure that I'm aligned with it, that makes sense, that this is what I am trying to say. And in that sense, it becomes an expression and a representation of me, because it's really me, and I've got a tool that's helping me. And that's the way I think about this, is as a tool. It just happens to be a really, really good, really powerful tool. But it's not really capable of doing things independently without that oversight and judgment piece that David has been talking about.
Yes, I like this part because so if we pop up a level and think the picture of a flywheel, like this virtuous cycle, right? What you're talking about is, and now we have more time to strategize, to think about the judgment part, and if we do that better, our decisions are better, right? And so if you feed the flywheel that way, the decisions are better, so we get better data, right? And then that feeds it again. The other the other way to think about it is there's an opportunity just to collect more data and feed it into the system, right? This doesn't require like judgment. This is just like hard work. Like go to the silos, go in the coal mines and dig up all the data, right? And the more data you have, the better the prediction. Then that will feed what Mark was talking about. What you're talking about, Mark, where like now it's your part to add the judgment to this, and if you do that better, make the right decision, success adds more data into the system, right? And if there's someone just shoving coal into the system, shoving more data, that just gets better and better and better.
Yeah, well, you're going back to the data, and I got to say, one of the things that we're really doing as we look at practical applications of this is, first, how are we getting the data in there? So I talked about the meeting leveraging Gen AI for helping us with meeting content and things like that. All the data is in there, and in fact, a tool like Copilot makes that really, really easy to do. You've got all the data, and it'll structure it for you, and you can make queries of it, right? So all of a sudden, you've got all of this data, and the question is, how do I actually do something useful with it? There's other examples too that we're exploring around portfolio management. So we have switched to a single source of truth for our portfolio management. So we're tracking all of our projects in there. Now we've got all of the data in there, and that's all in preparation for the things that we're going to be able to do with that. We're going to be able to leverage AI to create dashboards on the fly, to do some pretty intelligent queries, to break down, where our time is going. Potentially even to be making predictions at some point. So I think on the portfolio management side, that we just see the growing opportunities there to leverage AI. There's certain things we do on a regular basis within our projects. So for example, because we do medical devices, safety is paramount. We've got a very robust safety risk management process based on the 14971, the standards that are applicable in the space. We've got this whole stack, basically, of safety risk assessments we've done on a variety of products, which we are able now to take and use to start training an LLM, so that we can now use that to do, say, a first pass safety risk analysis, because in many cases, many of the hazards, maybe many of the concerns are the same, leakage current, different things like this are consistent from project to project. So we can start leveraging it. We can use it for training. So we're looking at putting documents like our QMS documents, for example, into a custom GPT, so that we can now query, what is the process for change management? Give me a quick summary of that, so that we can get just-in-time learning and just-in-time information. So I think incredibly powerful opportunities in all of those kinds of spaces for really taking and using Gen AI to make work better, instead of having to go dig the SOP out and read through it and try to make sense of the SOP language. Something that actually can integrate across SOPs, across work instructions, right, and pull the relevant pieces together.
Yeah, and what I think is really interesting here is once you get all that data in one spot and the prediction gets better, right? That context shift fundamentally changes the nature of the work, right? So it's not just a matter of let's do this bigger, better, faster, more, but it's going to fundamentally shift the nature of the work so that we're actually solving something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's really happening is AI or any tool is shifting the work from what we used to do. And once we get really good at it, it can change entire business models. It can change, entire, like the problem is no longer the problem. Now you go upstream and you're solving the cause and not just all the symptoms.
So I'm looking at some of the bullet points from the registration today. And one of the things that we promised to talk about was to really give a hands-on, kind of an easy to try applications for professionals. So Mark, you had mentioned really thinking about how you are using AI to do some portfolio management, for training, to treat it as a single source of truth within your organization. I'm curious, either organizationally or personally, what tools have you used? What has been the biggest time saver for you, or has been the most enlightening for you? I know, David, you've done several trainings at different organizations in Minnesota. So where do you see those real impacts coming for people on the line who are thinking about, how do I really start diving into this, either on a personal level or through my organization? How would you steer them? David, we'll start with you.
Okay, good. Am I like itching? So one of the things that I think is super interesting in the space is the opportunity to shift entire business models, right? So I'll give an example of how people have thought about AI and something we use normally or use every day, Amazon, right? So if you think about Amazon, what's really interesting is they're using AI and prediction to figure out things like the probability of people in the Twin Cities ordering widget X is really high. So let's send widget X to a local warehouse. And then when Mark says, I like to buy widget X, it comes the next day, right? So they're preactively shipping things because they can now predict with high probability that someone in the Twin Cities is going to order this stuff. As that prediction gets better, right? If it gets to like near 100% accuracy, the business model shifts from can we ship this within the day to Mark to why don't we just send it to Mark before he presses the buy button? And then because we're highly confident Mark will want it, he keeps it instead of sending it back, right? Now that business model is not the same business model. And so all the systems that are in place to help Amazon do its current process is going to have to shift because now we're doing this other business model that I suspect will make more money, and it goes down, like it changes the nature of the work, right? Just FYI, there's a company that does this now. It's called Stitch Fix. And what they do is they send you clothes before you buy it. And their bet is we bet that we're so good at this that most people will keep the clothing instead of sending it back.
And David, just personally, so that's really interesting at the industry-wide level, but I'm curious personally, what AI tool do you use the most, and what have you seen as the return?
Yeah, so the things that I do now, so I'll give this tip. Think of AI as a tool, and what you're doing is you're building infrastructure to use those tools. So you can put in ChatGPT if you want, you can put in Anthropic, whatever, right? Um, the way that I use this tool are things like I ask the tool to be my thought partner, right? So it's going to create everything from I need to present at this function, and I want this. These are the results that I want to have, right? Be my thought partner and ask me questions about what you need so that we can form a good talk for the audience, right? And that back and forth is keep getting my brain out of I need to generate from scratch to let me use my judgment to shift the content to where I want it to go. So it stopped me from doing the busy work of forming the thing from scratch to here is a thing that I am now going to customize and shush into the thing that I want.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and weigh in too. I work primarily in a Microsoft environment. So in that scenario, the tool I'm using for the things that are described around, managing meetings and things like that is all Copilot based. But when I'm doing some of the things that David is talking about, trying to do some strategic thinking or doing some what ifs or doing some interacting with it, I tend to move more to ChatGPT. I've also used Gemini and Grok and a few others, but those tend to be my two go-to tools. And there's as you're thinking about doing that stuff, and there was a question in the Q&A about this as well. There's some questions around security, and I think that's a hugely important topic and thing for us to be aware of because the security and privacy of our data is a huge concern. I'm sure we've all had this experience where we say something near our phone and the next thing we know, we're getting ads about it, right? I mean, this happens. There are studies that show that this is the case, no matter how many times, the manufacturers of these products say they don't. It's definitely happening. So, for example, our license of Copilot and ChatGPT within the organization are both enterprise versions, which means all of the stuff we have internally is safe. It's not exposed outside of our firewall. It doesn't go back to train the models. It's not available outside. So within our organization, we're able to share business confidential information with those tools, with full confidence that information is safe and secure. When I think about it personally, I also have my own subscription to ChatGPT Plus, and there I'm much more concerned about it because there are a couple settings you can click where your data isn't used to train the model. I don't know that if I trust that or not trust it. For $20 a month that I'm paying, I don't think I'm buying a lot of trust. There's the other piece that your chats in ChatGPT are, they're persistent, and that information is all subpoenaable. So if you're thinking about, how do I make a nuclear bomb? Well, the record of it is going to be in ChatGPT, and that can be subpoenaed. So, you have to think about it. I don't always have the sense that data is private or secure. And I think that's something, we have to be aware of with all of these online tools. They provide us a lot of power and information and capabilities and things we couldn't do, but there's also another side of it. And I would say within the US, at least, our data privacy laws are well behind where they need to be, certainly well behind what the EU and other countries are. And that is an ongoing concern. And, I have to weigh that against the value, just kind of the inherent value of these tools and what I'm getting out of it. And it's a tough trade-off.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, there's a really interesting comment from Fred, one of our alumni of MDI program. And I feel like this is a whole other a webinar, but just thinking about the segmentation of data within an organization. So thinking about keeping C-suite level or financial data within the appropriate groups of an organization versus who has access to it more broadly in an organization. So really a lot of ethical questions and really interesting things around this. So it is 12:54 by my count. So I want to just throw, this went all together too fast, but I want to throw it back in both of your courts for kind of a closing statement to think about how what all this means for leadership and value. What does all this AI, ML injection into our daily lives mean for those things? So David, we'll start with you and then we'll head to Mark.
All right, let me see if I can do this in the middle. I think I want people to consider a different framework. And that framework isn't how do I make my product bigger, better, faster, more, but instead think about if the game is better decisions win, how can we make better decisions? And the framing here is if we make better decisions, we'll succeed as a byproduct. Right? It's not like we're focusing on making things faster. We're focusing on let's make better decisions. And I think from that framework, if you think about your work and the data that you're using, the data that you're generating, if you think of that in terms of making that virtuous cycle, the team that first architects that cycle wins.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I really want to leave folks as takeaways when it comes to some of these Gen AI tools, because when we talk about this in class, and I talk about to a lot of our students about it, they're very aware of what I call the dark side of some of these tools are. Now, I love them from a personal productivity standpoint. I love what they do for businesses and able to, do things faster, better, more efficiently. I think that this is really great, but there's also these concerns about what are the impacts of these tools on us as a society. If we think, for example, about social media, I think that there's a lot of very significant negatives associated with social media that we can point out that we're not doing anything to address. I would say most new tools and technologies have that kind of both positive and negative impact that they're going to have. And what we want to do is we want to emphasize the positive and minimize the negative and be really intentional about doing that. And sometimes we can really feel sort of helpless and out of control. But when I talk to students about this, I remind them it's important to think about, what the applications, what the consequences are. Think about what you want the outcome to be. What do you want this tool to do for us in the future? And think about what we need to do to make it work in that way, whether it's putting more regulations in place around data privacy and things like this, or whatever it might be, whether it's retraining of staff whose positions are going to be displaced into these new roles that we're going to create. We often don't think about the consequences and how to minimize the negative consequences. And I think it's incumbent for all of us as leaders to have that self-awareness, to think about those things and be educated on that and help think of ways to help mitigate the negative sides while enhancing the positive attributes of these new tools.
I just want to thank both David and Mark one more time for sharing your insights and experience with us today. It's been a really fast and engaging discussion about how AI and automation are reshaping the way we lead, innovate, and really think strategically about technology. Just one more plug before you go. You'll see a slide on your screen with the QR code, and we invite you to, if you're not already connected with us, to scan it and stay connected with the Technological Leadership Institute. You can learn more about upcoming events, webinars, professional learning opportunities, and all that good stuff. If you're a potential student, scan and think about coming to one of our programs. So as soon as you exit the webinar, a short post-event survey will pop up. If you want to take just a minute to share your feedback while it's fresh in your mind, it would really help us when we're thinking about shaping future topics around what's most valuable to you for events like this. And finally, just a quick reminder about TLI. At the Technological Leadership Institute, we're really passionate about developing leaders who can bridge the gap between technology and strategy. We really think about looking for students or people who are looking to connect with us to advance your career through one of our graduate programs, to partner with us, to offer customized training for your organization, or just to stay engaged in the conversation with us around all of these really fast-moving topics. So on behalf of TLI and the University of Minnesota, thank you for being here today. Have a great afternoon. And if you'd like to connect with David or Mark, you can find their information, their contact information on TLI's website. So if you want to keep that conversation going beyond today's webinar. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you at a future event.